Welcome back. We're continuing this hour in our reading of the history of Protestantism. And we have come to chapter 4 of book 3rd. So we are getting through this thing. And book 3rd is John Huss and the Hussite Wars. So we're in chapter 4 of that already, or getting into chapter 4 of that already. So I hope you're keeping up with me. If you're here following this day by day, but know that these are posted within a few days, usually on Rumble first. And I think and we're also posting them on a YouTube channel. My channel is just Nicholas Arthur on YouTube, where these are being posted with all of my Bible studies are being posted there too. So being posted there and on Rumble. So you can look them up if you want to catch up later, or you can find the playlist at my website, nicholasarthur.wordpress.com. On the Bible Studies tab, you'll see the Genesis study at the top. And, but this isn't the Genesis study. I guess I do need to put a link there to this. So I'll try to remember to do that later. But you can go to Rumble or the Nicholas Arthur channel on YouTube to catch up with this, the reading or the history of Protestantism as we post those. And when I finish one volume, which, is, 5 or 6 books per volume, if there's 5 volumes. So let's see, what is that? How many books are in there? Well, we're on book 3 anyway. I think there's 4 or 5 books in each volume to have 24 in 5 volumes. And when I finish each volume, I'm going to upload the Audible, which I'm going to edit from these readings for that later on. Okay, let's see, chapter 4. Preparations for the Council of Constance. A picture of Europe. The Emperor Sigismund. Pope John 23. Shall a council be convoked? Assembling of the council at Constance. Entry of the Pope. Coming of John Huss. Arrival of the Emperor. We have now before us a wider theater than Bohemia. It is the year 1413. Sigismund, a name destined to go down to posterity along with that of Huss, though not with the like fame, had just recently mounted the throne of the empire. Wherever he cast his eyes, the new emperor saw only spectacles that distressed him. Christendom was afflicted with a grievous schism. There were 3 popes, whose personal profligacies and official crimes were the scandal of that Christianity of which each claimed to be the chief teacher, and the scourge of that church of which each claimed to be the supreme pastor. The most sacred things were put up to sale and were the subject of simony bargaining. The bonds of charity were disrupted, and nation was going to war with nation. Everywhere strife raged and blood was flowing. The Poles and the Knights of the Teutonic Order were waging a war which raged only with greater fury inasmuch as religion was its pretext. Bohemia seemed on the point of being rent in pieces by intense commotions. Germany was convulsed. Italy had as many tyrants as princes. France was distracted by its factions, and Spain was embroiled by the machinations of Benedict XIII, whose pretensions that country had espoused. To complete the confusion, the Mussulman hordes, encouraged by these dissensions, were gathering on the frontier of Europe and threatening to break in and repress all disorders, in a common subjugation of Christendom to the yoke of the Prophet. To the evils of schism, of war, and Turkish invasion was now added the worse evil, as Sigismund doubtless accounted it, of heresy. A sincere devotee, he was moved even to tears by this spectacle of Christendom disgraced and torn asunder by its popes, and undermined and corrupted by its heretics. The emperor gave his mind anxiously to the question how these evils were to be cured. The expedient he hit upon was not an original one, certainly. It had come to be a stereotyped remedy, but it possessed a certain plausibility that fascinated men, so Sigismund resolved to make trial of it. It was a general council. This plan had been tried at Pisa, and it had failed. This did not promise much for his second attempt, but the failure had been set down to the fact that the then mitre and the empire were at war with each other, whereas now the Pope and the Emperor were prepared to act in concert. In these more advantageous circumstances, Sigismund resolved to convene the whole Church, all its patriarchs, cardinals, bishops, and princes, and to summon before this august body the three rival popes and the leaders of the new opinions, not doubting that a general council would have authority enough, more especially when seconded by the imperial power, to compel the popes to adjust their rival claims and put the heretics to silence. These were the two objects which the emperor had in eye: to heal the schism and to extirpate heresy. Sigismund now opened negotiations with John 23. To the Pope, the idea of a council was beyond measure alarming, nor can one wonder at this, if his conscience was loaded with but half the crimes of which popish historians have accused him. But he dared not refuse the emperor. John's crusade against Ladislaus had not prospered. The King of Hungary was in Rome with his army, and the Pope had been compelled to flee to Bologna. And terrible as a council was to Pope John, he resolved to face it, rather than offend the emperor, whose assistance he needed against the man whose ire he had wantonly provoked by his bull of crusade, and from whose victorious arms he was now fain to seek a deliverer. Pope John was accused of opening his way to the Tiara by the murder of his predecessor, Alexander V, and he lived in continual fear of being hurled from his chair by the same dreadful means by which he had mounted to it. It was finally agreed that a general council should be convoked for November 1st, 1414, and that they should meet in the city of Constance. The day came, and the council assembled. From every kingdom and state, and almost from every city in Europe, came delegates to swell that great gathering. All that numbers and princely rank and high ecclesiastical dignity and fame and learning could do to make an assembly illustrious contributed to give eclat to the Council of Constance. 30 cardinals, 20 archbishops, 150 bishops, and as many prelates, and multitudes of abbots and doctors, and 1,800 priests came together in obedience to the joint summons of the emperor and the pope. Among the members of sovereign rank were the electors of Palatine, of Mainz, and of Saxony, the dukes of Austria, of Bavaria, and of Silesia. There were margraves, counts, and barons without number, but there were three men who took precedence of all others in that brilliant assemblage, though each on a different ground. These three men were the Emperor Sigismund, Pope John 23, and, last and greatest of all, John Huss. The two anti-popes had been summoned to council. They appeared not in person, but by delegates, some of whom were the cardinalate. This raised a weighty question in the council, whether these cardinal delegates should be received in their red hats. To permit the ambassadors to appear in the insignia of their rank might, it was argued, be construed into a tacit admission by the council of the claims of their masters, both of whom had been deposed by the Council of Pisa. But, for the sake of peace, it was agreed to receive the deputies in the usual costume of the cardinalate. In that assembly were the illustrious scholar Poggio, the celebrated Thierry de Nem, secretary to several popes, and whom, it has been remarked, Providence placed near the source of so many iniquities for the purpose of unveiling and stigmatizing them. Aeneas Sylvaeus Piccolomini, greater the elegant historian than as any wearer of the Triple Crown, Manuel Chrysolaris, the restorer to the world of some of the writings of Demosthenes and of Cicero, the almost heretic John Charlier Gerson, the brilliant disputant Peter d'Ailly, Cardinal of Cambrai, surnamed the Eagle of France, and a host of others. In the train of the council came a vast concourse of pilgrims from all parts of Christendom. Men from beyond the Alps and Pyrenees mingled here with the natives of the Hungarian and Bohemian plains. Rooms could not be found in Constance for this great multitude, and booths and wooden erections rose outside the walls. Theatrical representations and religious processions proceeded together. Here was seen a party of revelers and masqueraders busy with their cups and their pastimes. There knots of cowled and hooded devotees solemnly telling their beads. The orison of the monk and of the stave and the bacchanal rose blend in one. So great an increase of the population of the little town, amounting, it is supposed, to 100,000 souls, rendered necessary a corresponding enlargement of its commissariat. All the highways leading to Constance were crowded with vehicles, conveying thither with all kinds of provisions and delicacies, the wines of France, the breadstuffs of Lombardy, the honey and butter of Switzerland, the venison of the Alps and the fish of their lakes, the cheese of Holland and the confections of Paris and London. The emperor and the pope, in the manner of the council, thought only of circumventing one another. Sigismund professed to regard John 23 as the valid possessor of the tiara. Nevertheless, he had formed the secret purpose of compelling him to renounce it, and the Pope, on his part, pretended to be quite cordial in the calling of the council, but his firm intention was to dissolve it as soon as it had assembled if, after feeling its pulse, he should find it to be unfriendly to himself. He set out from Bologna on the 1st of October, with stores of jewels and money. Some he would corrupt by presents, others he hoped to dazzle by the splendor of his court. All agree in saying that he took this journey very much against the grain, and that his heart misgave him 1,000 times on the road. He took care, however, as he went onward, to leave the way behind him for his safe retreat. As he passed through the Tyrol, he made a secret treaty with Frederick, Duke of Austria, to the effect that one of his strong castles should be at his disposal if he found it necessary to leave Constance. He made friends likewise with John, Count of Nassau, and Elector of Mainz, and when he had arrived within a league of Constance, he prudently conciliated the abbot of St. Ulrich by bestowing the mitre upon him. This was a special prerogative of the popes, of which the bishops thought they had cause to complain. Not a stage did John advance without taking precautions for his safety, all the more that several incidents befell him by the way, which his fears interpreted to auguries of evil, or portents of evil. When he had passed through the town of his Trent, his jester said to him, "The Pope who passes through Trent is undone." In descending the mountains of Tyrol, at that point of the road where the city of Constance, with the lake and plain, comes into view, his carriage was overturned. The pontiff was thrown out and rolled on the highway. He was not hurt the least, but the fall brought the color into his face. His attendants crowded round him, anxiously inquiring if he had come by harm. "By the devil," said he, "I am down. I had better have stayed in Bologna." He cast a suspicious glance at the city beneath him. "I see how it is," he said. "That is the pit where the foxes are snared." John 23 entered Constance on horseback, the 28th of October, attended by 9 cardinals, several archbishops, bishops and other prelates, and a numerous retinue of courtiers. He was received at the gates with all possible magnificence. The body of the clergy, says Lafont, went to meet him in solemn procession, bearing the relics of saints. All the orders of the city assembled also to do him honor, and he was conducted to the episcopal palace by an incredible multitude of people. 4 of the chief magistrates rode by his side, supporting a canopy of cloth of gold, and the Count Rudolph de Montfort and the Count Berthold des Ursins held the bridle of his horse. The sacrament was carried before him on a white pad, with a little bell about its neck, and the sacrament, a great yellow and red hat was carried, with an angel of gold at the button of the ribbon. All the cardinals followed in cloaks and red hats. Reichenthal, who has described the ceremony, says there was a great dispute among the Pope's officers as to who should have his horse, but Henry of Ulm put an end to it by saying that the horse belonged to him, as he was burgomaster of the town, and so he caused him to be put into his stables. The city made the presents to the Pope that are usual on these occasions. It gave a silver gilt cup weighing 5 marks, 4 small casks of Italian wine, 4 great vessels of wine of Alsace, 8 great vessels of the country wine, and 40 measures of oats, all which presents were given with great ceremony. Henry of Ulm carried the cup on horseback, accompanied by 6 counselors, who were also on horseback. When the Pope saw them before his palace, he sent an auditor to know what was coming, being informed that it was presents from the city to the Pope. The auditor introduced them, and presented the cup to the Pope in the name of the city. The Pope, on his part, ordered a robe of black silk to be presented to the council. While the Pope was approaching Constance on the one side, John Huss was traveling toward it on another. He did not conceal from himself the danger he ran in appearing before such a tribunal. His judges were parties in the cause. What hope could Huss entertain that they would try him dispassionately by the Scriptures to which he had appealed? Where would they be if they allowed such an authority to speak? But he must appear. Sigismund had written to King Wenceslaus to send him thither, and, conscious of his innocence and the justice of his cause, there he went. In prospect of the dangers before him, he obtained, before setting out, a safe conduct from his own sovereign, also a certificate of his orthodoxy from Nicholas, Bishop of Nazareth, Inquisitor of the Faith in Bohemia, and a document drawn up by a notary and duly signed by witnesses, setting forth that he had offered to purge himself of heresy before a provincial synod of Prague, but had been refused audience. He afterwards caused writings to be affixed to the doors of all the churches and of all the palaces of Prague, notifying his departure and inviting all persons to come to Constance who were prepared to testify either to his innocence or his guilt. To the door of the royal palace even did he affix such notification, addressed to the king, to the queen, and to the whole court. He made papers of this sort to be put up at every place on his road to Constance. In the imperial city of Nuremberg, he gave public notice that he was going to the council to give an account of his faith, and invited all who had anything to lay to his charge to meet him there. He started not from Prague, but from Karlowitz. Before setting out, he took farewell of his friends as of those he never again should see. He expected to find more enemies at the council than Jesus Christ had at Jerusalem, but he was resolved to endure the last degree of punishment rather than betray the gospel by any cowardice. The presentiments with which he had began his journey attended him all the way. He felt it to be a pilgrimage to the stake. At every village and town on his route, he was met with fresh tokens of the power that attached to his name, and the interest his cause had awakened. The inhabitants turned out to welcome him. Several of the country cures were especially friendly, and it was their battle which he was fighting, as well as his own. And heartily did they wish him success. At Nuremberg and other towns through which he passed, the magistrates formed a guard of honor, and escorted him through the streets thronged with spectators eager to catch a glimpse of the man who had begun a movement which was stirring Christendom. His journey was a triumphal procession in a sort. He was enlisting at every step new adherents, and gaining accessions of moral force to his cause. He arrived in Constance on the 3rd of November, and took up his abode at the house of a poor widow, whom he likened to her of Sarepta. The emperor did not reach Constance until Christmas Eve. His arrival added a new attraction to the melodramatic performance proceeding at the little town. The Pope signalized the event by singing a pontifical mass. The emperor assisting, attired in dalmatic in his character as deacon, and reading the gospel, there came an edict from Caesar Augustus that all the world, etc. The ceremony was ended by John 23 presenting a sword to Sigismund, with an exhortation to the man into whose hand he put it to make vigorous use of it against the enemies of the Church. The Pope, doubtless, had John Huss mainly in his eye. Little did he dream that it was upon himself that its first stroke was destined to descend. The Emperor Sigismund, whose presence gave a new splendor to the feats and a new dignity to the council, was 47 years of age. He was noble in person, tall in stature, graceful in manners, and insinuating in address. He had a long beard and flaxen hair, which fell in a profusion of curls upon his shoulders. His narrow understanding had been improved by study. He was accomplished beyond his age. He spoke with facility several languages, and was a patron of men of letters, having one day conferred nobility upon a scholar who was desirous of being ranked among nobles rather than among doctors. Sigismund laughed at him and said that he could make 1,000 gentlemen in a day, but that he could not make a scholar in 1,000 years. The reserves of his more mature years have sobered the impetuous and fiery spirit of his youth. He committed the error common to almost all princes of his age, in believing that in order to reign it was necessary to dissemble, and that craft was an indispensable part of policy. He was a sincere devotee, but just in proportion as he believed in the Church was he scandalized and grieved at the vices of the clergy. It cost him infinite pains to get this council convoked, but all had been willingly undertaken in the hope that assembled Christendom would be able to heal the schism and put an end to the scandals growing out of it. The name of Sigismund has come down to posterity with an eternal blot upon it. How such darkness came to encompass a name which, but for one fatal act, might have been fair, if not illustrious, we shall presently show. Meanwhile, let us rapidly sketch the opening proceedings of the council, which were but preparatory to the great tragedy in which it was destined to culminate. Chapter 5. Deposition of the rival popes. Canonization of Saint Bridget, a council superior to the Pope. Wycliffe's writings condemned. Trial of Pope John. Indictment against him. He escapes from Constance. His deposition. Deposition of the two antipopes. Vindication of Huss beforehand. The first act of the council, after settling how the votes were to be taken, namely by nations and not by persons, was to enroll the name of Saint Bridget among the saints. This good lady, whose piety had been abundantly proved by her pilgrimages and the many miracles ascribed to her, was of the blood royal of Sweden, and the foundress of the Order of Saint Saviour, so called because Christ himself, she affirmed, had dictated the rules to her. She was canonized first of all by Boniface IX, 1391, but this was during the schism, and the validity of the act might be held doubtful. To place St. Bridget's title beyond question, she was, at the request of the Swedes, canonized a second time by John 23. But unhappily, John himself being afterwards deposed, Bridget's saintship became again dubious, and so she was canonized a third time by Martin V, 1419, to prevent her being overtaken by a similar calamity with that of her patron, and expelled from the ranks of the heavenly deities, as John was from the list of the pontifical ones. While the Pope was assigning to others their place in heaven, his own place on earth had become suddenly insecure. Proceedings were commenced in the council which were meant to pave the way for John's dethronement. In the fourth and fifth sessions it was solemnly decreed that a general council is superior to the Pope. The synod congregate in the Holy Ghost, so ran the decree, making a general council, representing the whole Catholic Church here militant, hath power of Christ immediately, to the which power every person, of what state or dignity soever he be, yea, being the Pope himself, ought to be obedient in all such things as concern the general reformation of the Church, as well as in the head as in the members. The council in this decree asserted its absolute and supreme authority, and affirmed the subjection of the Pope in matters of faith as well as in matters to its judgment. In the eighth session, May 4th, 1415, John Wycliffe was summoned from his rest, cited before the council, and made answerable to it for his mortal writings, 45 propositions, previously called from his publications, were condemned, and this sentence was fittingly followed by a decree consigning their author to the flames. Wycliffe himself, being beyond their reach, his bones, pursuant to this sentence, were afterwards dug up and burned. The next labor of the council was to take the cup from the laity and to decree that communion should be only in one kind. This prohibition was issued under the penalty of excommunication. These matters dispatched, or rather while they were in the course of being so, the council entered upon the weightier affair of Pope John XXIII. Universally odious, the Pope's deposition had been grievous, heinous crimes, says Fox, were objected and proved against him, as that he had hired Marcellus Promensis, a physician, to poison Alexander V, his predecessor. Further, that he was a heretic, a simoniac, a liar, a hypocrite, a murderer, an enchanter, a dice player, and an adulterer. And finally, what crime was it that he was not infected with? When the pontiff heard these accusations, he was overwhelmed with affright, and talked of resigning, but recovering from his panic, he again grasped firmly the tiara which he had been on the point of letting go, and began a struggle for it, with the emperor and with the council. Making himself acquainted with everyone by his spies, he held midnight meetings with his friends, bribed the cardinals, and labored to sow division among the nations composing the council. But all was in vain. His opponents held firmly to their purpose. The indictment against John they dared not make public, lest the pontificate should be everlastingly disgraced, and occasion given for a triumph to the party of Wycliffe and Huss. But the conscience of the miserable man seconded the efforts of his prosecutors. The Pope promised to abdicate, but repenting immediately of his promise, he quitted the city by stealth and fled to Schaffhausen. We have seen the pomp with which John 23 entered Constance, in striking contrast to the ostentatious display of his arrival, was the mean disguise in which he sought to conceal his departure. The plan of his escape had been arranged beforehand between himself and his good friend and staunch protector, the Duke of Austria. The Duke, on a certain day, was to give a tournament. The spectacle was to come off late in the afternoon, and while the whole city should be engrossed with the feat, the lords tilting in the arena, and the citizens gazing at the mimic war, and oblivious of all else, the Pope would take leave of Constance and of the council. It was the 20th of March, the eve of St. Benedict, the day fixed upon for the Duke's entertainment, and now the tournament was proceeding. The city was empty, for the inhabitants had poured out to see the tilting and reward the victors with their acclamations. The dusk of the evening was already beginning to veil the lake, the plain, and the mountains of the Tyrol in the distance, when John 23, disguising himself as a groom or postilion and mounted on a sorry nag, rode through the crowd and passed on to the south. A coarse, gray, loose coat was flung over his shoulders, and at his saddle bow hung a crossbow. No one suspected that this homely figure, so poorly mounted, was other than some peasant of the mountains, who had been to market with his produce and was now on his way back. The Duke of Austria was at the moment fighting in the lists, when a domestic approached to him and whispered into his ear what had occurred. The Duke went on with the tournament as if nothing had happened, and the fugitive held on his way until he had reached Schaffhausen, where, as the town belonged to the Duke, the Pope deemed himself in safety. Thither he was soon followed by the Duke himself. When the Pope's flight became known, all was in commotion at Constance. The council was at an end, so everyone thought. The flight of the Pope would be followed by the departure of the princes and the Emperor. The merchants shut their shops and packed up their wares, only too happy if they could escape pillage from the lawless mob into whose hands, as they believed, the town had now been thrown. After the first moments of consternation, however, the excitement calmed down. The Emperor mounted his horse and rode around the city, declaring openly that he would protect the council and maintain order and quiet, and thus things in Constance returned to their usual channel. Still, the Pope's flight was an untoward event. It threatened to disconcert all the plans of the Emperor for healing the schism and restoring the peace to Christendom. Sigismund saw the labor of years on the point of being swept away. He hastily assembled the princes and deputies, and with no little indignation declared it to be his purpose to reduce the Duke of Austria by force of arms and bring back the fugitive. When the Pope learned that a storm was gathering and would follow him across the Tyrol, he wrote in conciliatory terms to the Emperor, excusing his plight by saying that he had gone to Schaffhausen to enjoy its sweeter air, that of Constance not agreeing with him. Moreover, in this quiet retreat and at liberty, he would be able to show the world how freely he acted in fulfilling his promise of renouncing the pontificate. John, however, was in no haste, even in the pure air and full freedom of Schaffhausen, to lay down the tiara. He procrastinated and maneuvered, and went further away every few days, in quest, as suggested, of still sweeter air, though his enemies hinted that the Pope's ailment was not a vitiated atmosphere, but a bad conscience. His thought was that his flight would be the signal for the council to break up, and that he would thus checkmate Sigismund and avoid the humiliation of deposition. But the Emperor was not to be balked. He put his troops in motion against the Duke of Austria, and the council, seconding Sigismund by its spiritual weapons, wrested the infallibility from the Pope, and took that formidable engine into its own hands. The decision of the council, said the celebrated Galilean divine, Gerson, in his sermon which he preached before the assembly, ought to be engraved in the most eminent places and in all the churches of the world, as a fundamental law to crush the monster of ambition, and to stop the mouths of all flatterers who, by virtue of certain glosses, say, bluntly and without any regard to the eternal laws of the gospel, that the Pope is not subject to a general council and cannot be judged by such. The way being thus prepared, the council now proceeded to the trial of the Pope. Public criers at the door of the church summoned John 23 to appear and answer to the charges to be brought against him. The criers expended their breath in vain. John was on the other side of the Tyrol, and even had he been within earshot, he was not disposed to obey their citation. 23 commissioners were then nominated for the examination of the witnesses. The indictment contained 70 accusations, but only 50 were read in public council. The rest were withheld from a regard to the honor of the pontificate. A superfluous care, one would think, after what had already been permitted to see the light. 37 witnesses were examined, and one of the points to which they bore testimony, but which the council left under veil, was the poisoning of John by his predecessor, Alexander V. The charges were held to be proven, and in the 12th session, May 29, 1415, the council passed sentence, stripping John 23 of the pontificate and releasing all Christians from their oath of obedience to him. When the blow fell, Pope John was as abject as he had been before arrogant. He acknowledged the justice of his sentence, bewailed the day he mounted the popedom, and wrote cringingly to the emperor, if haply his miserable life might be spared, which no one, by the way, thought of taking from him. The case of the other two popes was similar, and more easily disposed of. They had already been condemned by the Council of Pisa, which had put forth an earlier assertion than the Council of Constance of the supremacy of a council, and its right to deal with the heretical and simoniacal popes. Angelus Carrario, Gregory XII voluntarily sent in his resignation, and Peter de Lune, Benedict XIII, was deposed, and Otto de Cologne, being unanimously elected by the cardinals, ruled the church under the title of Martin. Before turning to the more tragic page of the history of the council, we have to remark that it seems almost as if the fathers at Constance were intent on erecting beforehand a monument to the innocence of John Huss, and to their own guilt in the terrible fate to which they were about to consign him. The crimes for which they condemned Balthazar Casa, John 23, were the same, only more atrocious and fouler, as those which Huss accused the priesthood, and for which he demanded a reformation. The condemnation of Pope John was, therefore, whether the council confessed it or not, the vindication of Huss. When all the members of the council shall be scattered in all the world like storks, said Huss, in a letter which he wrote to a friend at this time, they will know when winter cometh that they did what they did in summer. Consider, I pray you, that they have judged their head, the Pope, worthy of death by reason of his horrible crimes. Answer to this, you teachers who preach that the Pope is a god on earth, that he may sell and waste in what manner he pleaseth the holy things, as the lawyers say, that he is the head of the entire holy church, and governeth it well, that he is the heart of the church, and quicketh in it spiritually, that he is the wellspring from whence floweth all virtue and goodness, that he is the Son of the church, and the very refuge to which every Christian ought to fly. Yet behold now that head, as it were, severed by the sword, this terrestrial God enchained, his sins laid bare, this never-failing source dried up, this sun, this divine sun dimmed, this heart plucked out and branded with reprobation, that no one should seek an asylum in it. Chapter 6. Imprisonment and Examination of Huss. The Emperor's Safe Conduct. Imprisonment of Huss. Flame in Bohemia. No faith to be kept with heretics. The Pope and Huss in the same prison. Huss brought before the council. His second appearance. An eclipse. Huss's theological views. A Protestant at heart. He refuses to retract. His dream. When John Huss set out for the council, he carried with him, as we have already said, several important documents. But the most important of all Huss's credentials was a safe conduct from Emperor Sigismund. Without this, he would hardly have undertaken the journey. We quote it in full, seeing it has become one of the great documents of history. It was addressed to all ecclesiastical and secular princes, etc., and to all our subjects. We recommend to you with a full affection, to all in general, and to each and in particular, the Honorable Master John Huss, Bachelor in Divinity and Master of Arts, the bearer of these presents, journeying from Bohemia to the Council of Constance, whom we have taken under our protection and safeguard, and under that of the Emperor, enjoining you to receive him and treat him kindly, furnishing him with all that shall be necessary to speed and assure his journey, as well as by water as by land, without taking anything from him or his at coming in or going out, for any sort of duties whatsoever, and calling on you to allow him to pass, sojourn, stop, and return freely and securely, providing him even, if necessary, with good passports, for the honor and respect of the imperial majesty, given at Spires this 18th day of October in the year 1414, the third of our reign in Hungary, and the fifth of that of the Roman. In the above document, the emperor pledges his honor and the power of the empire for the safety of Huss. He was to go and return, and no man dare molest him. No promise could be more sacred, no protection apparently more complete. How that pledge was redeemed, we shall see by and by. Huss's trust, however, was in the one more powerful than the kings of the earth. I confide altogether, he wrote to one of his friends, in the all-powerful God, in my Savior. He will accord me his Holy Spirit to fortify me in his truth, so that I may face with courage temptations, prison, and, if necessary, a cruel death. Full liberty was accorded him during the first days of his stay at Constance. He made his arrival be imitated to the Pope the day after by two Bohemian noblemen who accompanied him, adding that he carried a safe conduct from the emperor. The Pope received them courteously, and expressed his determination to protect Huss. The Pope's own position was too precarious, however, to make his promise of any great value. Palates and Cautius, who of all the ecclesiastics of Prague were the bitterest enemies of Huss, had preceded him to Constance, and were working day and night among the members of the council to inflame them against him, and to secure his condemnation. Their machinations were not without result. On the 26th day after his arrival, Huss was arrested, in flagrant violation of the imperial safe conduct, and carried before the Pope and the cardinals. After a conversation of some hours, he was told that he must remain a prisoner, and was entrusted to the clerk of the Cathedral of Constance. He remained there a week at the house of this official under strong guard. Thence he was conducted to the prison of the monastery of the Dominicans on the banks of the Rhine. The sewage of the monastery flowed close to the place where he was confined, and the damp and pestilential air of his prison brought on a raging fever, which had nearly terminated his life. His enemies feared that after all he would escape them, and the Pope sent his own physicians to take care of his health. When the tidings of imprisonment reached Huss's native country, they kindled a name in Bohemia. burning words bespoke the indignation that the nation felt at the treachery and cruelty with which their great countrymen had been treated. The puissant barons united in a remonstrance to the Emperor Sigismund, reminding him of his safe conduct and demanding that he should vindicate his own honor and redress the injustice done to Huss by ordering his instant liberation. The first impulse of Sigismund was to open Huss's prison, but the casuists of council found means to keep it shut. The emperor was told that he had no right to grant safe conduct in the circumstances without the consent of the council, that the greater good of the church must overrule his promise that the council by its supreme authority could release him from his obligation, and that no formality of this sort could be suffered to obstruct the course of justice against a heretic. The promptings of honor and humanity were stifled in the emperor's breast by these reasoning. In the voice of the assembled church, he heard the voice of God, and delivered up Huss to the will of his enemies. The council afterwards put its reasoning into a decree to the effect that no faith is to be kept with heretics, to the prejudice of the church. And I think I'm going to stop there for now because I'm kind of running out of gas at the same time we're coming to the end of the hour. So we're going to put a mark there. Right, you're listening to James A. Wiley's History of Protestantism. A great read, I suggest. I believe that every Christian should familiarize themselves with the history of the church. After all, Jesus said, "I will build my church." And it should be important that we look into what Jesus has been doing for 2,000 years and see that, yes, he has been building his church, and to see, well, how Jesus has been building his church and through what pains those members, those living stones, have been put to, especially those that have been put in the forefront of his church to lead his church, what pains they have gone through and what sufferings they have suffered for the name of Christ, following in the footsteps of their master. I am posting this on firstamendmentradio.net Rumble channel, so if you want to go back, when I post these, there's a cursory editing done to them to make them a little more listenable. And finally, when each volume is done, they will be posted on Amazon for Audible, for people who have Audible accounts to listen to. And they will be fully edited at that point to make them much more listenable than they are. So I thank you all for suffering through me with the initial recording of this, but it will serve the purpose of God, and hopefully you're enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying reading it again. And to become more familiar with church history is very beneficial for everyone in Christ. So something that the Antichrist powers of this world do not want you to be familiar with. So they keep history hidden, especially that great Antichrist church. They hate the history because it exposes who they really are. Anyone familiar with history will become a Protestant. That is anyone, especially those few that God is calling out of that great harlot church, because many people are born into it. I was born into that church, and God called me out. To remain in that church is to remain ignorant of history and ignorant of the truth. But that truth, that Jesus Christ has paid the price for your sins and it's by his blood alone, that can even be learned from reading the Bible for yourself. Well, that's all the time we have. May the Almighty bless you all and keep you all as you travel on the narrow way that leads to life. Secrets of the Rapture. Is there a 500-year-old conspiracy? A propaganda machine so pervasive and entrenched, yet so elusive that the entire world could be taken in by it, working in plain sight, but unseen by the world for what it truly is? If prophecy is God-given history in advance, why does the prophecy that has conquered the age also exclude nearly 2,000 years of history? What is it that they are afraid that the light of history will reveal? To understand our place in time and prophecy, we must look in history for an interpretation, that which stands the test of time, that which agrees with the Word of God, and history has proven to be true. When cunning fables and fearful speculations are removed from our sight, then we may clearly see what is truly expressed in Bible prophecy, both that which has been fulfilled and that which has yet to come. God's express word is the sword that must be wielded to remove the scales from the eyes and dispel the darkness of deceitful conjecture. Secrets of the Rapture was written to expose that which the spirit of the age has conjured out of the darkness to blind the eyes of the church in the world today. Secrets of the Rapture, Deconstructing Pre-Tribulation Dispensational Futurism by yours truly, Nicholas Arthur, is now available at lulu.com and Amazon. Secrets of the Rapture,